The boy was 10 when he sprinted into the headlights, arms wrapped around a bleeding pit bull, a handwritten sign trembling in his grip. "Please, he's my only family." The Hells Angels convoy stopped. Crow, their president, dismounted and knelt in the road. Within a minute, the boy and his dog were on the back of a motorcycle, racing toward a clinic. But the vet bill was thousands, more than Marcus could ever imagine. What happened next in that waiting room and the box that arrived at his grandmother's door 1 week later changed everything. Marcus was 10. His mother was dead. All he had was Blue. When the dog got hit by a car, Marcus ran into the path of a Hells Angels convoy, holding a sign that said, "Please, he's my only family." Crow stopped. But what he learned inside that vet clinic would test the club's outlaw code like never before. Marcus didn't remember his mother's face anymore. He was 6 when she died, cancer eating through her like a slow fire, but he remembered her hands, the way they cupped his cheeks, the way they tucked Blue, then a puppy the size of a coffee mug, into his bed on the last night she ever spoke. "He's yours now, baby. You take care of each other." That was 4 years ago. Blue had grown into 60 pounds of anxious devotion, a brindle pit bull who slept across Marcus's legs every night and whimpered whenever the boy left the room. The dog was his mother's final gift, the only living thing that still carried her voice, her warmth, her promise. So when a rusted sedan jumped the curb outside their grandmother's house and struck Blue in the hind leg before speeding off, Marcus's world collapsed into a single, desperate mission: get help. The neighborhood was no help. Abandoned strip malls, boarded-up houses, a corner store that closed at dusk because the owner had been robbed twice. Marcus ran barefoot for half a mile, Blue cradled in his arms like a trembling child, the dog's blood soaking through his t-shirt. No neighbors answered their doors. The payphone outside the laundromat was gutted for copper. He had no cell phone, no money, no adult to call. His grandmother, Miss Clara, worked double shifts at a nursing home 40 minutes away. She wouldn't be home until midnight. It was almost sundown when Marcus heard the low thunder of engines. A Hells Angels convoy, 15 bikes deep, was rolling down the empty road like a slow-moving storm. To a 10-year-old, they looked like monsters from a nightmare. Beards, tattoos, leather cuts with skulls and wings. Crow, the chapter president, rode point. A 53-year-old Vietnam vet with a graying ponytail and a reputation that preceded him. He'd done federal time. He'd buried 3 brothers lost to gang wars. He'd been spat on by cops and preachers and ordinary citizens who crossed the street when his shadow passed. He had not seen a child run toward him with tears and blood and a handwritten plea in 4 decades. Marcus stood in the headlights holding his sign. The convoy stopped. Crow killed his engine. What followed was faster than Marcus could process. A biker named Dog, the club's medic and a former Army field surgeon, knelt in the road and examined Blue with surprising tenderness. The leg was shattered. Arterial bleeding. Without surgery, the dog would die within hours. Crow didn't hesitate. "Get the kid on the bike. Wrap the dog in my jacket. We're going to Doc Jensen's clinic 20 miles east. Move." The vet clinic was closed. Crow banged on the glass until a terrified receptionist unlocked the door. Inside, under flickering fluorescent lights, Dr. Jensen, a weary old veterinarian with a tremor in his left hand, delivered the news. Surgery would cost $4,000. Amputation was cheaper, but the damage was too high. They'd need a specialist. Blue needed a plate and 6 screws plus weeks of rehab. Failure to pay meant the dog would be put down by morning. Marcus collapsed into a plastic chair and sobbed, his small body heaving. Crow looked at his brothers. The room was tense. The Hells Angels were not a charity. They were outlaws who scraped by on construction jobs, bike repairs, and the occasional gray market deal. $4,000 was more than most of them carried. But Crow had seen something in that boy, something that reminded him of his own daughter buried 20 years ago, something that reminded him of every door that had ever been slammed in his face. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. "Bones, it's Crow. I need a favor, and you're not gonna believe why." Across town in a darkened house, a man watched the clinic through binoculars. He recognized the dog, and he knew exactly who had been driving that sedan. The boy had no idea his nightmare was only beginning. The man behind the binoculars was named Ellis Dupree, and he was the reason Blue was bleeding on that steel table. Ellis wasn't some random driver. He was a bail bondsman and dogfighter who'd been running an underground ring out of a warehouse on the county line for 6 years. Blue wasn't just any pit bull. He was a champion's offspring, stolen from a rival breeder 3 years ago, passed through 3 owners, and eventually dumped at a shelter where Marcus's mother had found him. Ellis had been hunting that dog ever since, not because he wanted Blue back, but because the dog's disappearance had cost him 40 grand in lost stud fees and a deal with an interstate gambling outfit that didn't forgive debts. Ellis had spent 2 years tracking down every lead, and when he finally spotted Blue in Marcus's front yard 2 weeks ago, he swore he'd get even. The hit and run wasn't an accident. Ellis had aimed for the dog, hopping to kill it and walk away clean. Now the boy had dragged the whole Hells Angels chapter into his grudge, and Ellis was not about to let a 10-year-old and a pack of aging bikers cost him another dime. Inside the clinic, Crow stood over Marcus like a stone sentinel while Dog stabilized Blue's leg. The vet, Dr. Jensen, worked with shaky hands clamping the bleeders, inserting an IV line, muttering about the cost of the specialist. Crow didn't blink. "I told you, Doc. Bill goes to me." Jensen looked up, eyes wide. $4,000 plus aftercare. This is a working dog. This is a kid's family, Crow said. The only family he's got left. You gonna let it die? Jensen swallowed hard and went back to work. But here's the thing. The Hells Angels didn't have $4,000 sitting around. The chapter was broke. Their clubhouse was a rented garage with a leaky roof. Their main income came from scrapping metal and fixing bikes under the table. Crow himself had $63 in his wallet. What he did have was a network, a patchwork of brothers across 3 states, men who'd done favors for him and owed him in return. And one of those men was Bones Harrison Sutton, vice president of the Iron Crows MC in Ohio, an old ally from a different club, forged in a bar fight back in 1982. Crow's call to Bones wasn't just a request for money, it was a call to arms. "It's not just the dog," Crow said, his voice low. "The boy's got a target on him. I need advice and I need backup." That call triggered a chain reaction. By midnight, Bones had alerted his entire chapter. By 2 in the morning, a small convoy was already rolling south. But before they could arrive, Ellis made his first move. He sent 2 men to the clinic, ex-cons who'd worked for him as dog handlers, to intimidate the vet and retrieve the animal. They didn't count on the Hells Angels still being there. When the 2 thugs walked through the clinic door, Crow and 3 of his brothers were standing in the waiting room. No words were exchanged. The thugs saw the patches, saw the size of the men, and walked right back out. But they left a message on the windshield of Crow's bike. "Dog dies or the boy does. Your choice." That threat changed the calculus. This was no longer about a vet bill, it was about a child's life. Crow, who had buried his own daughter after a drive-by shooting 2 decades earlier, looked at Marcus sleeping on the waiting room bench, his small hand still clutching Blue's collar, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. The cold, clarifying fury of a father with nothing left to lose. He called a chapter meeting on the spot. All 15 members voted. The decision was unanimous. They would protect the boy and his dog, no matter the cost. They would become the family that Marcus didn't have. But Ellis had connections the Hells Angels didn't know about. He called a contact inside the sheriff's department, a deputy on his payroll, and reported a stolen dog, claiming the pit bull had been taken by a child and was being held by an outlaw motorcycle gang. The deputy, a man named Coughlin, didn't hesitate. He put out a bulletin: "Armed bikers occupying a veterinary clinic, potentially dangerous, a child's welfare at risk." Within hours, a tactical unit was on standby. The system that was supposed to protect Marcus was now being weaponized against him. Meanwhile, Bones and the Iron Crows arrived just before dawn, 20 bikes and a flatbed truck loaded with supplies. Bones took one look at the situation and said, "They're coming with badges or they're coming with guns. Either way, we're not leaving until this is fixed." What Bones knew, and what Crow was about to learn, was that Ellis Dupree wasn't just a dogfighter. He was the nephew of a state senator with a campaign war chest and a long reach. The vet clinic's phone lines were being monitored. The clinic's landlord had received a call threatening to pull his license for harboring criminal elements. The walls were closing in, and the only way out was for someone to make a sacrifice that could ruin them forever. The phone on Dr. Jensen's desk rang at 5:45 in the morning. It was the building's owner, a man named Gerald Kemp, who'd been woken up by a call from the state senator's office. Kemp's voice was trembling. "Doc, I'm losing my lease if those bikers aren't out in an hour. The state's pulling my occupancy permit. I can't afford that." Jensen looked at the dog on the table, at Marcus asleep on the bench, at the 15 men in leather who hadn't moved all night. "Then take it up with them," Jensen said, and hung up. But that was just the first wave. At 6:15, Deputy Coughlin pulled into the parking lot. Not alone this time, 2 patrol cars, lights off, and a county animal control van. He walked to the clinic door with a folded court order and a sidearm on his hip. Crow met him at the threshold, flanked by Dog and Tank. "I got a stolen property warrant for that pit bull," Coughlin announced. "Step aside." Crow didn't budge. "That dog is post-operative on an IV drip. You move him, he dies." "You want that on your body cam?" Coughlin's jaw tightened. He hadn't expected anyone to know about the body cam. But Crow had spent 6 years in a federal cell. He knew how cops operated. Inside, Marcus heard the voices and bolted upright. He threw himself across Blue's gurney, arms spread wide. "You're not taking him. He's mine. My mom gave him to me." Blue, groggy from anesthesia, whimpered and tried to lift his head. A biker named Preacher moved quietly between the boy and the door. "Nobody's taking nothing, son. Just stay there." That's when Miss Clara arrived. She'd been pulled off her night shift by a call from Child Protective Services, told her grandson was in danger. She burst through the door in her nursing scrubs, breathless, furious. She saw Marcus crying over Blue, saw the deputies outside, and understood instantly. She didn't ask whose fault it was. She walked straight to the gurney, put her hand on Marcus's back, and turned to face the law. "That dog ain't stolen. He was abandoned at the shelter. I got adoption papers in my Bible drawer. You want to arrest a grandma for saving a dog?" Coughlin's radio crackled. The tactical unit was requesting permission to enter. But before he could respond, a news van with a satellite dish pulled up to the curb. A reporter named Angela Ruiz, who'd spent a decade covering corruption in 3 counties, stepped out with a cameraman. Bones had made a call at 4 a.m. to a cousin who owed him a favor. That cousin worked in the station's assignment desk. Angela had been told she'd find a senator's nephew, dogfighting, a child, and a motorcycle gang. She couldn't have scripted a better story. Angela's camera went live on the morning news. An armored unit outside a vet clinic, a crying child, a grandmother in scrubs blocking the door, and a dozen outlaw bikers standing shoulder to shoulder across the entrance. The live feed hit social media within seconds. By 6:30, local station switchboards were jammed. By 7, the state senator's press secretary issued a statement denying any involvement. But by then, the text messages between the senator's office and the sheriff's department had started leaking. Someone in the department, furious about being used, had sent screenshots to Angela. But the worst was still coming. At 7:45, Ellis Dupree himself showed up. Not in a squad car. He walked across the parking lot in jeans and a faded polo, hands in his pockets, looking like a man with nothing to hide. He held up a USB drive, claiming it contained proof that the Hells Angels had stolen the dog as part of a gambling debt. "Just let the law do its job," he called out, voice dripping with false concern. "The kid's being manipulated." The crowd outside, which had now swelled to over 100 neighbors and onlookers, murmured uncertainly. Crow stepped forward into the sunlight, his cut gleaming with patches from a lifetime of war. "You want to show that drive, Ellis? Go ahead, but let's show yours too." He nodded to Dog, who emerged from the clinic holding a tablet. On it was a video, recorded by a hidden camera in Ellis's own warehouse, footage of dogs forced to fight, of animals left bleeding on concrete. A year earlier, a disgruntled handler had copied the files as insurance. He'd passed them to Bones 2 hours ago via an encrypted message. The camera zoomed in on Ellis's face as his expression crumbled. The murmur from the crowd became a roar. Senator Dupree's office went silent. The tactical unit stood down. Deputy Coughlin tore up the warrant on camera, and later that day, Ellis was arrested not for dog theft, but for animal cruelty and racketeering. The standoff ended without a single handcuff on the bikers, but Marcus didn't know any of that yet. All he knew was that by noon, Blue was stable, the vet bill was covered by anonymous donations flooding into the clinic's account, and a strange peace had settled on the parking lot. Crow knelt in front of him, looked him in the eye, and said, "You stood in front of a convoy to save your family. That's guts, boy. Don't ever forget that." Then he handed Marcus a leather patch, the club's honorary insignia, and walked back to his bike. The convoy rolled out, leaving behind only the scent of exhaust and the silence of a miracle. 1 week later, a plain cardboard box appeared on Miss Clara's porch. No return address. No note on top. When Marcus lifted the flap, he didn't find cash or a bill. He found a sealed envelope and a worn leather journal. Inside the journal, in neat handwriting, were the names and photographs of 15 bikers, each one accompanied by a promise: a trust fund for Marcus's education, 4 years of paid school lunches, and a scholarship to be renewed every year for any child in the county who had lost a parent. The envelope contained a single check, signed by Bones Harrison Sutton, for $41,000, the exact cost of 4 years at the state university in Marcus's name. Beneath the check, a handwritten line: "We were 5 doors that said no once, never again." Marcus's tomorrow had been bought not with pity but with the grudging, stubborn loyalty of men the world had given up on. Marcus didn't open the envelope right away. He sat on the porch steps, the journal heavy in his lap, and turned the pages one by one. 15 photographs, clipped from old newspapers or taken at rallies, each with a name and a promise written beneath it. Dog, free vet care for Blue for life. Preacher, a suit for graduation, size to be determined. Tank, a used pickup truck when you turn 16, provided you keep your grades up. And on the last page, Crow's handwriting, cramped but steady: "You stood in the road for your family. Now we stand with you. Semper Fi, little brother." Miss Clara read over his shoulder, her hand covering her mouth. She'd spent her whole adult life working doubles, praying the check would clear before the rent came due, and now a stranger had handed her grandson a future she couldn't have bought with 10 years of paychecks. She did not cry. She folded the check into her apron pocket, kissed Marcus on the forehead, and said, "Your mama sent angels on motorcycles. Don't you ever forget that." Blue's recovery was slow but complete. The plate and screws held. By week 6, he was limping after Marcus on 3 legs, tail wagging like a metronome. By week 12, he was back to sleeping across the boy's legs every night. The clinic, which had nearly lost its lease, became a minor landmark. Strangers sent dog food and thank-you cards. Dr. Jensen's waiting room stayed full for the first time in 15 years. He hired a second vet and stopped shaking when he operated. The political fallout was swift. Senator Dupree announced his retirement within the month, citing health concerns, though no one believed it. Ellis Dupree took a plea deal: 18 months for animal cruelty, 5 years probation for racketeering. The dogfighting ring was dismantled, and 42 dogs were rescued from 3 properties, many of them pit bulls who'd never known a kind hand. A local rescue took them in and named their new intake wing Blue's Run. Deputy Coughlin resigned before the internal affairs report was complete. The leaked text messages had made him a liability. The sheriff, eager to bury the scandal, released a public statement praising the Hells Angels for their community spirit, a sentence no one in the department had ever expected to type. For Marcus, life shifted in small, permanent ways. The scholarship trust meant he could stay in the same school, no longer terrified that his grandmother's hours would be cut. The unpaid lunch bills disappeared. A retired English teacher, one of the Angels' mothers, started tutoring him twice a week. By the end of the school year, his grades had climbed from near failing to the honor roll. He kept the leather patch pinned inside his backpack, and on days when other kids asked why he wore that ratty bandana on his wrist, he just said, "It was a gift." 1 year later, on a Saturday morning almost exactly to the hour, Marcus sat on the same porch where the box had appeared. Blue, now fully healed and thick with muscle, lay beside him. The sound of motorcycles rumbled up the road, not a convoy, just 4 bikes heading back through town on a charity run. Marcus recognized Crow's gray ponytail from 3 blocks away. He ran to the curb, waving. Crow pulled over, killed the engine, and walked up with that same heavy gait. "How's the dog, kid?" "He's good, sir. He's real good." Crow nodded, glanced at Miss Clara in the doorway, and offered a rare, fleeting smile. Then he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small, framed photograph, a grainy snapshot of a woman with kind eyes holding a pit bull puppy. "Found this in the clubhouse archives. Took us a year to track it down. That's your mom the day she adopted Blue from the shelter. Somebody took her picture for a newsletter. Thought you might want it." Marcus stared at the photograph. He hadn't seen his mother's face in detail since he was 6. He traced her outline with a trembling finger. "Thank you," he whispered. Crow just squeezed his shoulder and walked back to his bike. No long goodbyes, no speeches. Just the engine firing up and the bikes pulling away and the quiet that came afterward. That afternoon, a young couple drove up to the clinic with a stray cat that had been hit by a car. They had no money. The receptionist started to explain the clinic's policy when Marcus, who'd been helping Dr. Jensen mop the floors, walked over. "Just bring it in," he said. "We'll figure it out." Dr. Jensen looked at the boy, then at the leather patch peeking from his back pocket, and nodded. "Some lessons don't need a classroom. They just need one open door. And if you look at what happened on that road, the lesson is uncomfortable. Because the people who stopped weren't the pillars of the community. They were the ones the community had already written off. 15 men with records, with ink, with scars. They saw a boy holding a sign and didn't ask for his papers. They saw a dying dog and didn't calculate the cost. They just moved. Here's the part I can't stop thinking about. At some point in your life, you've probably been told who to fear. The man with the tattoos, the group on the motorcycles, the folks who don't look like you, live like you, pray like you. But what if the person you've been taught to fear is the exact person who'd stop for you when no one else would? Marcus got his dog back. He got a scholarship and a truck and a room full of unlikely uncles. But he got something else too. He learned early that goodness doesn't have a uniform, that mercy can grow in the most unexpected soil, and that when the whole world tells a group of men they're dangerous, sometimes they become the only ones brave enough to be gentle. If this story moved you, drop a heart in the comments, not for me, for them. Share it with someone who needs reminding that quiet kindness still rumbles down lost highways. Subscribe so the next story finds you. Because somewhere tonight, somebody's still holding up a sign, and the only question left is, will you open the door, be the 7th door?